Hello, David Zaritsky for the Bond Experience. Welcome. It is Friday here in the States in the Northeast. It is 5 p.m. Eastern, which, judging by my watch, that means it's happy hour. It's cocktail time. Yeah, I don't know if you all heard. It is happy hour. Welcome to the Bond Experience Happy Hour. Well, no, that's not entirely true. Welcome to the Bond Book Club, which kind of is a happy hour. This is kind of cool that we're doing this on a Friday. You know, it would have been fun for all of us that I'm seeing in the chat room: Alex, Michael, Jack, Ladies Who Bond, DTUK, Not Stirred, Mark Smith, Josh Ferguson, Sauceboth, Martin Barrett. This is like Romper Room. You're all here. Thank you for coming for Thunderball. Yeah, the discussion about Thunderball. And it would have been enough for us to do a happy hour. It would have been enough for us to do a Bond book club. But today it was announced that Horowitz is coming out with a new book in 2022. This is a cause for celebration for those that read and like to consume those type of things. That would have been enough too. But there's something else that's going on today, and we did this very purposely. Today would have been Ian Fleming's 113th birthday. Happy birthday to Ian Fleming. So this is a celebration tonight. It is not just a book club, but now we're going to get into the details of things. We're going to open it all up. Welcome, everybody, to the Bond Book Club. Fancy Schmancy brought to you by Joe Darlington of Being James Bond. Hello, everybody. I obviously could not do this alone. I need three ingredients for tonight's conversation, maybe four. Number one, I need all of you. It is really important that people like Fletcher Sykes talks, comments, adds their own opinion. As you can see, with technology, we can actually pull you into the conversation. Blofeld's birthday, who even knew? We've got Alex Lamas. That was a boss opening. Yeah, it was, Alex. So please add to the conversation. You're going to really be the secret ingredient here. But I needed to bring in some friends to talk about this. First of all, both of these individuals that are co-hosting with me are authors of books. They've written their own books. So what a perfect opportunity to talk about another book, Thunderball. So the first person I'm going to bring in here is Roland Hulme. Roland, please welcome to the stream. How are you?
Hello, David. I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I couldn't even imagine this without you. Now, Roland, you've got to educate the uninitiated. You've written a couple of interesting, intriguing books. It kind of melds spy, action, intrigue, violence, and sensuality. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I love the way you use the word sensuality. It's so euphemistic. So ever since I was 9 years old, I wanted to be a writer, and I used to love the Saint books. And then I really got into Ian Fleming. It's been huge influence my whole life. But I never really found my voice as an author of like spy books. And so I started writing romance, which I love. And then I pushed the two together, and that's been kind of my shtick, and I love it. I get to tell the adventure stories I want in the really interesting and vibrant way of romance stories. And thanks to your encouragement, I've actually started publishing some of them under my own name, marketed towards men, and that's been very interesting. Got a lot of positive feedback there. So that's what I do. I write.
Well, and you've got groupies. You've got Jocelyn. You've got Jack. I mean, everybody's lighting up. They're obviously fans of yours. And there's another author waiting in the green room, eating all the green M&Ms. Speaking of green, we're going to add him in here. And you know something? He's got to wear sunglasses at night because the future's so bright. Joe Darlington, head of section, Being James Bond. Joe.
I like to wear jackets when we do our book club thing. Look, do that my college professor look, but it's can't do it in the summertime. So I kind of went full Thunderball for the occasion. So
I like that you went full Thunderball, though. That was like very auspicious of you.
Yeah, I did. And by the way, I have to apologize to everybody watching because once my screen popped up, we kind of lost James Bond's luscious buttocks that were up in the upper left-hand corner. So I apologize for that one. You got to look at me instead.
But luscious buttocks.
They will be back. They will be back. If you can count on one thing with Ian Fleming's books is that some luscious buttocks will be making an appearance.
That's right. You guys used the word sensual before, which I love. We're keeping that theme going.
Yeah, Hans, that's not ZZ Top. He's on our next episode coming up. But we understand.
Legs.
Lot of love out there, gentlemen, ladies, everybody in the chat room. We're going to dive into this. This is an important conversation. Spoiler alert: this is one of my favorite books. But before we get that, for those of you at home or those of you here, I would like you, if you could, to perhaps get your drink together. Now, I know that Roland, you have coffee. Why do you have coffee? Remind me.
This is very uncharacteristic. It's like people are going to be, what have you done with Roland? But I am actually drinking coffee from my current favorite mug, thanks to Commando Bond. And I'm going to try and pull an all-nighter to finish this book I've been working on for like a year. So I thought this is the perfect way to get me into the literary frame of mind. So it's just hot black coffee.
I love that. By the way, everybody in the chat, please let us know if you have an adult libation, what you were drinking. Even if you don't have an adult libation, we've got Ken, who's doing a rum Collins tonight. We've got, we're having cocktails. That's what this is all about. Book club, you have a libation, you drink, you sit back, you relax, you talk to friends, you make enemies. It's all good. I am drinking something from the book. I love the sound. I am drinking something from the book. Bond has quite a few double vodkas. And unfortunately, as you read, Felix gets quite upset because there's a giant olive. I couldn't find an olive the size of an apple or a plum, but I did find 3, as you could see, gigantic olives. And sure enough, if I take this out, about a third of the vodka disappears. So in honor of Felix's hook and his tenacity not to let them hold it back, I'm drinking a vodka double. And head of section, what are you drinking?
Well, I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anyone that I decided, since we're talking Thunderbolt, to go with the rum Collins. But what I wanted to sort of share with you, David, is that this bottle of Havana Club has been hanging around my on the bar for quite a while. Don't remember where I was that I smuggled this in from. This was like a duty-free shop pickup, because obviously we can't get Havana Club in the States. So basically, this is the inaugural. Listen. Wait.
Oh, that's a good sound. That's like a champagne popping almost.
Cracking this sucker open for the first time, and I'm making myself a rum Collins as we speak.
Nice. Now, what's in a rum Collins, Joe?
A rum Collins is rum, and by the way, a lot of people might know that when I do a Collins, I tend to lean towards gin, but I decided this is the perfect occasion to go full Bond, do a rum Collins, and use rum. A rum Collins is rum. It is citrus juice, which usually it's just lemon juice, but I like to mix it up and do lemon and lime. And I kind of prepped my mix beforehand. This is I actually put my simple syrup in here to sort of save me a step. So this is homemade sour mix. So I'm going to put 2 parts of the sour mix.
Wow, this is like official.
In my glass. It certainly is.
My mouth is watering.
I know.
And I'm going to top it off. Another crackle.
That's a lot of gas for you, Joe, even for you. Just saying.
Did you see that?
Yes.
I'm wearing a lot of it.
So much of this takes place underwater. So Joe wanted to really get into it.
I did.
What's that line from Never Say Never Again? But at least my martini is still dry.
That's right.
All right. So there we go. Excuse me while I dry off. Here's my rum Collins.
It's beautiful. All right. Here's what I'd like to do. In honor of the birthday of Ian Fleming, I'd like everybody to raise a toast to the man himself. Happy birthday, Ian Fleming, everybody.
Cheers.
Oh, that's good. Oh, absolutely delicious. All right, here we go. We're here to talk about a book while we sip and drink and enjoy each other. And again, everybody like Morgan. Hey, Morgan, good to see you again. Cheers. Please join in. Jack, cheers. Ladies who bond, cheers. Everybody's cheering to Ian Fleming because without him, we wouldn't have a movie. I don't know. We wouldn't have books. We wouldn't have the mug that Roland was holding up. And we wouldn't have a lot of things. And we'd probably be talking about, I don't know, Star Wars. So here we go. Thunderball, as all of you know, is the 9th book in Ian Fleming's James Bond series, the 8th full-length novel. It was published in the UK in March of 1961. Many of you may know, but for the uninitiated, let's talk a little bit about this. It actually started out, the first novelization of it at least, started out as an unfilmed James Bond screenplay. It was really born from a collaboration by 5 people. Obviously, Ian Fleming, a guy named Kevin McClory, we'll bring that up in a second, Jack Whittingham, Ivor Bryce, and Ernest Cuneo. And the shared credit was starting out with 10 outlines and treatments and scripts. That's a lot. A lot of titles were coming out of this. Number 1, little one called Spectre. Another one, James Bond of the Secret Service. Didn't float. Longitude 78 West, sexy as hell. No, it came out to be Thunderball in the end. And as you know, we're going to be talking about some controversy a little bit later. But let's get some general feelings about this. Roland, as an author, as an appreciator of these books, what did you think of Thunderball overall?
I think it's a really interesting book because when I read it, I felt the vibe was completely different to all of the Ian Fleming books we'd read before, which I think makes sense because it was, many chefs as part of that stew. But also some of the things that, Ian Fleming's been criticized for, like his structure of his books, it was very, very tight Hollywood style thriller structure because it was structured from a screenplay. And I found that interesting. And so, yeah, the vibe was very different. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it was interesting to go from books that were kind of like romance books like Casino Royale suddenly to this, which was pure hardcore spy stuff.
I agree. And especially coming out of some of the anthology, for example, that we covered in the last Bond book, where it's a little bit more about introspection and about character. To me, just in a general sense, because we're going to dive into each individual thing, this is one of the first books that really felt like a James Bond movie. And I'm not saying it copied it exactly. There were things that were close, and we'll talk about that. But it felt like this could be a movie. You had Bond, being a little bit more humorous, a little bit more action, superhero oriented. Things were a little larger than life. The world was at stake. Some of the tropes that we know about. This was that book, I feel, that kind of started to cobble all that together. But Joe, what did you think overall?
It was thoroughly enjoyable. First time I reread it in quite a while. And it was funny as I was sort of getting back into it. You sort of do that drill in your mind, put the movie out of your head, just pretend you're reading this for the first time. But I was sort of reminded, wow, in many ways, I sort of feel like this really is the quintessential Bond book, I think, in many ways. Not saying it's my favorite. But in terms of just sort of getting that, like you said, that sort of superhero character down pat, but doing it in a very Fleming way where you're kind of in some ways getting to know the character even better than we have before, yet kind of getting into that more structured adventure. Bad guys have stolen nukes. We have to go track them down. So it's in some ways it's just classic Fleming spinning yarns about who this man is, but again, breaking into that kind of superhero framework that we've kind of now take for granted.
Yeah, and a couple people in the chat room mostly saying that they enjoyed it, like the change of pace. Dakota, you saw there, not a fan of it. If you're not a fan, please say. I'd love to highlight that and chat about it. But I think at least the 3 panelists are in agreement. It's quite a romp. And we've got to start with the fact that even the critics of the time said that this is a Bond novel. It's a bit of a duh. Of course it's a Bond novel, but what Joe is saying, I think, is so important to highlight. This is a James Bond story. You are following James Bond. It's not, he disappears for 3/4 of the book and then comes back and makes an appearance. This is truly James Bond. I think if you speak about the character, and let's start with the character of Bond, he's got this incredible weakness of women. Even saying like "I love you" at times that seemed kind of awkward. He has obviously the sex. He's got the drink. He's got the humor. He's got 60 cigarettes. He's got the quips. Like, oh my gosh, there's these like one-liners now that we've known him for. I almost felt like this was a lighter James Bond character. It's not that I was picturing Sean Connery. It definitely stopped short of that, but it felt a little bit lighter. What do you think, Roland? What was the Bond that you encountered in this novel?
I would totally agree with you. I was kind of comparing how he appeared in my head to how when I read Goldfinger, and there was a lot more lightness to it. I mean, he was very introspective in previous books, thinking about death and stuff like that, whereas here it was more about life. He was living a lot more. And I wonder if that was something to do with Ian Fleming's own health issues at the time. And maybe that was something that inspired the beginning of the book. So maybe that's why it had so much more vibrancy to it.
I totally agree. By the way, you may know this just by that hint, but when M reads the medical report, Ian Fleming actually used his own medical report as a basis for what M was reading. So, he always uses his own experience, and we have a lot of examples of that coming up. But in this particular case, he literally used probably his drinking, cigarette habits. I know from some of the people that were telling stories about him in GoldenEye, they said that he did go on a health kick at one time to be quickly 180'd right after that. But Joe, what about the Bond for you?
Well, first of all, I when I was reading him talking about the stuff about Shrublands, M is lecturing him on health and things. You could sort of tell this was, and I think this is a sign of good writing, is that a really good writer will have two people having a discussion debate where you sort of don't know who you side with. Like a poor writer will. One person says stuff and the other person will tell them what's what. This was, I thought this was very interesting, and it sort of felt like kind of an inner dialogue, something where I know I should be doing this, and I know the arguments for getting healthy. The other part of me thinks this is kind of hogwash. So I was enjoying that stuff right away. And it kind of reminded me early on, oh yeah, this is good stuff. I'm in safe hands reading Fleming. He always does good. But I totally agree with you about this being a lighter Bond. You sort of pick that up when you meet Domino. I remember when Domino comes into the picture, she's not quite the winged dove type. She's got imperfections, but she doesn't really need rescuing. I mean, she does a little bit. In some respects, she's got that damsel in distress thing going on, but for the most part, she's pretty much in control. She's not damaged. She's not somebody who needs, someone to come help her out of her situation. She's doing fine. And Bond just kind of likes that about her. And he kind of likes the playfulness and the not so serious nature of her, and he's attracted to it, etc. So I find that it works. It is for a story that is essentially, this is the big one, 007, the end of the world. If you don't find the rockets, it doesn't feel that way. It feels pretty light, and it's enjoyable, I think, because of it.
He's a lot more. Oh, sorry. I was going to say he's a lot more sexist than I'd noticed in previous books. There are some like deliciously inappropriate sections, like he meets Domino and she drives like a man, because most women are careful and conscientious and slow drivers. And there are several sections where his attitude towards women seems a little more of the time than in other books.
And that's all Fleming, for sure.
They only use the mirrors to adjust their makeup.
Yes. I mean, there were so many things like that, but even the way he helps himself to Domino at certain times and kind of takes advantage of that, or, decides to tell her about her brother. after the fact, which felt a little bit Roger Moorish in Live and Let Die to Rosie. But I think that was, and again, we've got to go back to Fleming in this particular case because first of all, the Thunderball had been adapted about 4 times in this particular case: comic strip, Daily Express newspaper, cinema, radio, etc. But in this particular case, like what was it? The health clinic, Shrublands, which we definitely have to talk about. That was inspired by Fleming's own trip to Enton Hall Health and a farm right next door. I mean, that was basically Shrublands' whole moniker of how they put it all together. So it's interesting here because I think that obviously Fleming is tracting onto a lot of these book situations.
Yeah.
By the way, I love this. Martin Barrett says the book put me right off of white bread. That's going to happen.
Yeah. I gotta tell you that his comment there reminded me, I was shocked. And again, like I said, I don't want to skip ahead. I'll just say it real quick. I was shocked how many things are in this book that translate very closely in the movie. Like there's not a lot of reworking. I mean, when they get around to making the movie, they are interpreting this novel, but
perhaps more than any other novel.
Yeah.
It could be, yeah. And Ladies Who Bond made a very good point. The fact that because this book was originally incarnated to be a movie, this was, I would say this is the funniest story. This is the final product is a movie based on a book based on a movie screenplay, which technically never happened, so yeah. It started out with the idea that this would be a movie, and she makes the point probably why you don't see a lot of inner monologue. There are scenes in Casino Royale, almost whole chapters where Bond is sort of just kind of inner monologuing to himself. Here it's mostly action and mostly dialogue. Yeah. In fact, there was a lot of scenes in this that I sort of forgot, like all of a sudden we'd be somewhere and Bond is doing something, talking to somebody. So there's not a lot of introspective in this.
No. And M is an interesting character too, and how he aligns with Bond, because, I'm trying to really marry the two together and push the movie away. But what I'm coming back with is M in the book is softer. He's the one that comes up with the idea to go to the Bahamas, not Bond, for example, like Bond did in the movies. Yeah. So M is a more active participant. He's on the healthy kick, then off the healthy kick. I found that if you wanted M to be dissected in a book, this is the book where he's dissected.
And he had been to Shrublands beforehand, hadn't he? That's why.
That's right.
And that's interesting because obviously he must have had some health issues to take care of.
Absolutely. And they, it's almost like, dare I say, Fleming, with all of his foibles, was having a little bit more fun with the characters. M wasn't always this curmudgeon, angry guy. There were, dips and peaks, and even Moneypenny's taking the mickey out of M, saying, oh, this is just a 6-week kick. He'll be right back. Remember when he did this? And, commiserating with the other admins. So I think he's just having a bit of a romp here.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. He really is, like I said, I mean, I found it to be one of the more fun books. And I found my brain following the plot the way I would sort of, watch a movie or like I said, not a lot of deep introspection, just a lot of following what's happening. I mean, there were times, I think if there's any criticism I have of the book, is that there were times when I felt like the scenes were sort of blending into another, when not a lot of corners. I didn't find a lot of then Bond left here and we move on to another scene. They tend to move right into another. In fact, again, pretty similar to the way a screenplay might work. I remember the part when Bond goes from I forget where he was. I think it was right after he's having the martinis with Felix that he ends up in the casino playing against Largo, and then he's buying Domino a drink. And it really does just sort of like very smoothly one transitions right into another without much of a big moment to change the scene. You know, so again, I suspect is that probably because this was meant to be a screenplay.
Yes, because it's like Jocelyn was saying, a movie is supposed to make you go so fast you don't notice the cracks and the ebbs and the flows. This does the same thing, but maybe we did find a chink in the armor, because maybe to a fault. The things that I love about all of these books, as you know, no shock, are the lifestyle moments. But I was starting to lose track of, all right, so they just had double vodkas. Now they're having double bourbons. Now they're having a hamburger, but he had a club sandwich back at the room. Right. And almost because I use those as waypoints, I was getting confused. And I liked when we got to talk about the environment of Shrublands, because Alex Lamas has a great point. He was surprised how much of Fleming's nutritional information is in line with what we follow now. M's nutritional comments were dead on, and even what they were subscribing, you could actually see it as like, Trader Joe's and Whole Foods, 2021. I was thinking of like yogurt and lemon juice and ginger and all these things. But what I liked about Shrubland is I think Fleming took a risk. Shrublands, and let's face it, it's a spa, took the environment for a third to a quarter of the entire book. I mean, that's one environment. He's not globetrotting around like in a lot of the movies or in some of the other books. He's stationary in basically big walls, but yet he keeps I'll call it the spy versus spy moments very active. So they're suspenseful. It's kind of a gotcha moment. I thought that was extremely effective. But as a writer, Roland, what did you think about the Shrublands part?
Oh, I think that's really interesting what you point out, because also thinking from like a screenplay point of view, it makes a lot of sense to have a large section of the book in one particular location. But when you talk about the spy versus spy, that's what I really loved about it, because where he and Count Lippy are kind of like testing each other with very lethal and dangerous and injurious traps. I kind of liked the way they also had to do that in a kind of clandestine way, because obviously you don't want to alert anybody that you're trying to kill another spy or injure one. And it's very subtly written, I think.
That's a good point. And by the way, the Gleaner has a point, Joe, I want you to react to. He says, I love Thunderball because of the fact that Fleming takes his time narrating the story, maybe lets it unfold. The passages on the nature cure in Shrublands or on Mr. John Player contributed greatly to the atmosphere. Did you get that? Did you feel like he was unraveling it slowly but surely?
Yes, he was definitely taking his time, and I did sort of also get that vibe. I remember at one point, I think when they were, I guess when they were landing the plane and taking the bombs off the plane. Yeah. At one point, I realized, like, wow, we're already into like chapter, like it was something like chapter 10, and I was like, wow, this is and I was kind of remembering, like, is this how? Did I always feel it moved this slow? But not slow in a bad way, but he does flesh out a lot of things. And by the way, I did really enjoy the kind of tit for tat with Count Lippy in this. And frankly, there was a scene later that they don't do in the film, but they did in the book, where Lippy follows Bond all the way to London to try to do him in. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty great scene to not have. I mean, and it sort of makes logical sense that you would have seen this character show up again. I sort of feel like in terms of just general storytelling, you would have had sort of like that third beat where, this thing reaches its natural conclusion. I suppose there's just too much going on when you're doing the film to bother with that. Yeah. And maybe if you saw the character too many times, you'd start to think he was like Jaws, who's going to keep popping up everywhere. So you just said, all right, let's put this to bed over here. But yeah, it was very good stuff, and I thought it was paced pretty well.
So, Joe, this will bring back memories. I hadn't read this book, Thunderball, since you and I and our significant others went to the Bahamas together on vacation, which I'm sure you remember well.
Sure do.
A couple brain cells dead later.
Right. So moments are hazy, but
yeah, but we have video, which is even crazier. But it's been that long, and I was taken aback in a very positive way of how well Fleming, in this particular case, tends to weave the story together so one incident connects to another. Some of his other books, there's an incident and he really doesn't go back to it. And I know he writes 2,000 words a day, does his thing, drinks, then writes 2,000 words a day. And you as authors, you could tell me if that's effective or not. I found in this particular case, though, everything had some sort of connection and came back to it. Even on the unraveling of Count Lippe, to have him circle around to him being able to put those puzzle pieces together, I think was very effective. And it's got to be hard to do.
I wonder if that was the influence of the other people who contributed to the screenplay, though, because as we've mentioned about how the structure is much tighter, and I love like the structure format of books, and I think that's why it works so well, because other people might have been like, okay, Ian, this is what you need to do.
That's a great point, because in a screenplay, you can't have those dangling participles, those loose ends. You're screwed otherwise. Gentlemen, what did you think of, and I liked this character. I liked his humor. I liked his just nothing's impossible attitude. What did you think of our Felix Leiter in this book?
He was lighter.
Yes! He'll be here all evening, folks. Tip the waitress. I loved him, but what did you guys think?
I think he was definitely fleshed out a lot more, I think, than in previous books, because in previous books he'd been like a figure that James Bond could back things back and forth with, whereas here he actually came across more as a real person. And I love like the whole way he was working for the Pinkertons, then he got brought back in by the CIA. I love the description of his car, the Studelac, which was that was Diamonds Are Forever, sorry. But I just thought he was there was a lot more fun, and I think he was written as if, okay, we need to put this person on a screen, so therefore he actually needs to have more than just saying yes, James, and drinking martinis with him, which had been some of the limit in previous books. Yeah, and I think in this particular case, Leiter was, first of all, fantastic, a drinking buddy. I mean, I love all the things that he was, the libations that he was consuming, but I also like the fact that he was a little bit of an action hero to himself. I mean, with his hook, he puts a fin on it and says, "I'm just going to go for it." I mean, it's almost like in the movies when you have an ancillary background character get involved truly with the story and the action, and you're kind of like you're either going hooray, or like Joe may have done in License to Kill, where you see Q go on the field, where you're like, "Oh no." But I think it works here. What do you think, Joe?
It's funny. I had a flash at one point, probably right around the time when they were in the bar and he's complaining about the big giant olives, and he kind of ends up going on a whole tirade about the hotel industry in general. And it was kind of funny. It was almost like, is this out of place? I swear I had a flash. One of Raymond Benson books had Bond visiting Leiter in Texas, and while they're there, Leiter takes Bond to a Tex-Mex restaurant, right? To the point where you had Bond suddenly being won over by a Chili's or whatever, or a south of the border, wherever this was supposed to have been, and talking about frozen margaritas. And all of a sudden Bond is describing frozen margaritas the way he would a martini or whatever. And you're just like, what the heck am I reading? I swear to you, when Leiter was on this tirade, I was starting to have a connection, saying, now I kind of see it. Now I almost see this Leiter as being somebody who would take Bond to a Chili's. I mean, it was. Honestly, I thought he was a lot of fun in this. I mean, when he's yelling at the waiter, saying you should recognize a real drinker when you see one, and you should make your drinks accordingly. The stuff you're doing to the liquor, give that to the tourists. When you see a real drinker, you give him a real drink. I thought that stuff was great. I was loving that. So I really enjoyed him in this a lot.
I did too. And it's funny you bring up that point, because I love also the moments in here when they're eating, and they eat and drink. They're like the Odd Couple all throughout this book. I mean, a lot, even more than like Joe and I usually do. And there was one point where, he has a very dissatisfactory hamburger. He's like, that's not a hamburger. That's not a hamburger. And it's just like this wonderfully frivolous, curmudgeon-y Felix Leiter that I think just, you know what, Roland, you said it at the beginning of this conversation about him. It lightens the mood. This could be a very dark story about almost the end of the world, with these missiles going off, but it lightens it a lot.
I wonder if all the restaurants and all the meals they have, and it's not just because Ian Fleming likes to write about food, but maybe they were thinking from a screenplay point of view. You can't just have two people batting back and forth. They have to be doing something, and eating is the perfect thing to be doing. So maybe that's why they kept setting all these things in restaurants.
Gentlemen, I don't mean to do this after 34 minutes, but I got to get a little evil on you. I hope you're okay with that. And everybody that's in the chat room, you may want to take a little sip if you've got something in your coffee, some bourbon, Roland. We got to talk about Spectre, because we've got an introduction. There's a lot of controversy over who came up with Spectre. Most people lean towards Fleming, but a lot of people obviously say it could be McClory. It could be one of the other guys. Whittingham is also a contributor of that. What I loved about this, and you can say, what was better, Smersh or Spectre? You got kind of the two ends of things. I love the introduction of not only Blofeld, but the numbers. Number 12, number 7, number 9. I thought that was genius. And at first I'm like, how am I going to keep track of that? And yet somehow he wrote it so each one of the numbers became a character. Because I walked away from this book thinking, there's really no henchman. And I'm like, David, no. You don't understand. The numbers of Spectre, that's the army of Blofeld and Largo. But guys, what was your reaction to Spectre overall?
I would say this was like set the framework for what the spy genre is, isn't it? I mean, Austin Powers has taken it to extremes. It's like when you listen to Shakespeare now, it seems contrived because there have been so many ripples of it. This established what the tropes of the spy movie thing was, where having your secret organization with the acronym and all of these different things that we've ripped off so many times started here. Agreed.
Joe, what did you think?
I did the same thing where I it's amazing. We take it for granted now. We watch the Austin Powers movies, kind of goof on this evil organization routine, but this was really the origin. I mean, it was Fleming and these guys sitting there working this up that really created this whole dynamic. I loved it. Again, I was really getting lost in some of these early chapters talking about Spectre, the numbering system. Somebody in the chat just said, so why was Largo number 1 and Blofeld was number 2? Alex Lama said, and they say in the book that they kept mixing the numbers up to just so no one could ever keep track of who was who, in case anybody was ever doing surveillance on them, etc. So yeah, I was loving all of it, and again, I love that Blofeld is just sort of mysterious enough in this. We're getting a little bit of him, but certainly no more than Largo or anybody else.
That's a major point, Joe, that I walked away with. I kept thinking, and a couple people have pointed this out, this was a screenplay first, and I have a feeling like they were working on this could be like the Blofeld trilogy, because they have such a strong introduction in the novel of Blofeld, and then he just kind of goes away, and then it's Largo's story, which to me was a bit strange at first. And then I realized, oh, okay, maybe this is like an introduction of a major character like you would in a trilogy setup where you get a taste of them, but you're really, it's like the Emperor. You get a taste of them in Empire Strikes Back, and then it's his movie in Return of the Jedi. So I almost got that kind of feeling with this organization.
And the three books together, on Her Majesty's Secret Service and Unit of Choice, they're called the Blofeld trilogy, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. And Joyful Jay's got a good point. It could be that Largo was number 1 because of his operation. And I think he's right. I don't think it was a hierarchy. I don't think it was like, who does number 2 work for, like the Austin Powers thing where it's like in pecking order, which I thought made it so interesting because, first of all, I have to tell you, this is one of the first books since Dr. No that Fleming wrote where I was a little bit on my edge. But I was on my edge, not with Bond, but with the Spectre guys. Like I was like, oh shit, like, is this going to be just like the movie where the guy gets electrocuted? Yep. Oh crap. That guy's a dissenter. Is he going to get shot 3 times in the face? Yup. I mean, I was kind of like, dude, Largo's a tough cookie.
I just read Andy Horowitz's book, Forever and a Day, and they talk about how the 00s weren't concentric numbers. There was, random things. So I wonder if he lifted that from Thunderball.
I think you're probably right. Paul's got a great point. I always found Blofeld at his most chilling before he first met Bond, in my knowledge of the books and the films. You're right. Yeah. You're right. He's and by the way, I found Blofeld very effective in a chilling way, scary. I felt Largo too. I mean, with those description of the big hands, and I love Fleming's, I've got to do something weird with a body part, mentality. But the giant hands, and this wasn't a scarred guy. This was a guy who was popular with the women, which was also, I'm wondering, was borrowed from the screenplay, because when you want to put matinee idols, even sometimes in the bad guy parts as well.
I like that. And the big hands make him sort of physically intimidating. That came across very much in the books. Whereas, you have some villains who aren't like that, but it's always good when you've got the villains who James Bond is going to have a tough time actually physically overcoming.
Exactly. Alan's got a great point. The Blofeld you don't see was the best Blofeld.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I find that a lot of storytelling in general, let me say it another way. J.J. Abrams gets a lot of crap for being great at the build-up and terrible at the payoff. But I kind of find that, and I'm not defending J.J. Abrams because I think he's a hack, but I do sort of feel a little like, well, that's not really fair. I think a lot of writers will tell you that the build-up part is kind of the easy part. The payoff is tough because you've built something up. I mean, I think probably the example of where it works is the Dr. No film. They talk about Dr. No, and then you finally meet him, and he's, he is pretty intimidating, and he's whatever. You only live twice, in my humble opinion. The payoff is not so great. But the example there is, well, we spent many films building up, not just the first part of one film.
Yeah.
So I find that it is very difficult. In fact, I can recall the Union trilogy in Benson's books were sort of similar. He kind of did something similar where he built up to this big villain. Once you met him, and not a lot of payoff. So, but I think it's just inherently difficult to do that.
It is. And by the way, Alfonso Castle has a really good point. Largo was definitely a playboy in the novel. And this is an interpretation from the Folio Society. And I'll try to hold it up effectively as my
microphone. That is a beautiful book.
It is a beautiful book. Yeah. Really good art. But look at, that's Largo there. And he's kind of an Adonis. He looks like a Solaflex model. He's gigantic. Yeah. He's doing some pretty nasty things. Don't hold that against him. His idea of foreplay, I guess. But one of the things that I found interesting is, imagine, if you will, if they had done that in the movie, because in the movie they gave him a very, piratical, if that's a word, that would be the coolest word.
That is a word. That was used in the Saint books, because the Saint was described as piratical, and that is, I got
guys, we're ending this right now. That is the best word ever. So he's a bit of a pirate, he's on a ship. He's got the mono, he's got the whole thing with the patch. In here, I like it because it's more like GoldenEye. He's an equal to Bond. He's kind of, got that whole kind of feel to him, which I thought was really effective.
Yeah. I'd say we'll talk about it more later, because I'm kind of chomping at the bit to do sort of like the movie book comparisons that I know we will do.
It's coming.
One of the things that I kept thinking is like, wow, the more I am rereading the book, I'm kind of impressed with how they cast the film. But yes, you're right. I think I sort of felt like the film interpretation of Largo was kind of partially accurate to this character, but maybe not quite right. I think somebody who is a little more Bond's equal, I think in the movie they're kind of parsing a little bit, where it's like a little bit of a guy who's kind of like Bond, but also a little bit of Goldfinger.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And I think in the novel, yes, he's a little more athletic and et cetera, et cetera.
Perfect casting of Largo would have been John Wayne. Well, I'll tell you, little limey. Just come on. No, I don't. We're going to do that. We're going to play that casting game. It's just you wait. Listen, we've got to talk about Domino. And I will volunteer just to kind of warm things up a little bit. I really liked her much more than I remember. And I'm going to actually go out on a limb because I love Domino from the movie. One of my favorite Bond girls. I liked the novel one better. I thought she had more dimensionality.
I don't know if that's a word or not.
Damn it, just crack me up,
like
Roland. She has much more dimension to her. She was complex. I loved, and this is no spoiler, I'm sure you've all read the book, the way she disposes of Largo at the end, as opposed to just being on a ship, mysteriously coming up a ladder. No, she uses her skills, which they introduce earlier in the book. The fact that she can use an aqualung, the fact that she's athletic. In this movie, listen to me go. In this novel, Fleming describes her, I think, in a very different way than he describes the other women in his novels. I think it's much more positive. It's much more sassy. It's more face forward. I mean, there's just so much to it that I found her a much more interesting character than I remember. Roland, what do you think?
Well, I mean, Joe pointed out that she's capable. And she's not a damsel in distress, as had been shown before. And what you said about, them showing how she could use an aqualung and she was capable of, and she had these skills. I like that because I think one of the problems these days where in TV shows and stuff where everyone's like, we've got to have a strong women character, and they just give them skills and attributes without necessarily explaining where they come from. And I think this is very good to be like, she can do these things. She can kill the baddest guy because she has these skills and these strengths and this is athleticism. And it makes her come across much more believable as a strong, powerful woman.
Yeah. What'd you think, Joe?
I loved it. And interestingly, again, I remember when one of the things that I raved about when I talked about the film Thunderball was that in the film, they have this great meeting underwater. It's so beautiful. They literally meet underwater for the first time with all the tropical fish and everything, and I love it. But I find that to be a perfect exercise in understanding the differences between cinema and the written word, because as much as I love that on screen, I love here how we need good old school banter. We need Bond is there, she's there, he's got to be cool and charming and kind of win her over with words, and that's exactly what you get. So I love the scene of them just kind of chatting and drinking and shooting the breeze on the streets of Nassau when they meet. And yet I love her character in this. Like I said, she's not and it's interesting because they treat it pretty gently. The idea that she is, I mean, I heard the word courtesan used. I heard kept woman, et cetera. I mean, she was Bond's mistress. And I thought it was interesting because in the film, the way she's cast, I sort of felt like after rereading it, I'm like, I think she's well cast. I certainly like Claudine Auger as this character on screen. I find her to be just a tiny bit innocent in like a little too innocent for this part. Maybe I'll even say a little doughy-eyed. I think she probably would have been better served with someone like Maria, who the cigar girl from The World Is Not Enough. Maybe even a Monica Bellucci, possibly someone who's like just a little more kind of almost street savvy.
I was just going to use the word someone that's more aware, because I felt like the movie version of Domino was kind of like going around and just literally she was a product, a result of what was happening around her. This one was considering, like, I really believed in the courtship of Bond, because at first she's kind of regarding him like, do I want to spend more time with him? Yeah. You know what? I do want to spend more time with him, which is a very Bond thing to do. You don't usually hear the Bond girl saying that about Bond. They usually just go, take me, and, even her twisting things around and saying, oh yeah, I could have walked with those spines. It didn't hurt that much. I just wanted you to do that. I mean, I'm like, Fleming, look at you go.
Yeah, I totally agree. She is a very intriguing character. I like that she gives as good as she gets. Right. I think in the film, she just kind of smiles her way through it, and it's okay. And it would never occur to me to complain. But then when you read the book, you're like, wait, there's a little more depth there. And I think they probably could have done a tiny bit better even.
Yeah. And Jorge has a really good point. All Bond girls have more dimension because in the movies, they don't have so much time to explore the characters. And of course, that is, I just found in this particular movie, and it goes back to what Roland said, and it could be the screenplay thing. I will give it there, that the arc of this individual, the way they consider, the way they act more like a real person, the reality sense of things, better plays with Domino than other Bond girls in the other book. Roland, what do you think?
I think that's really interesting. I mean, we've spoken about how the Bond character is kind of different. And when you remove the introspection that was kind of a signature of the books previously, and you just show Bond having dialogue and taking action, it's a classic case of like show, don't tell in terms of writing. And I think it does do a really good job of actually being able to build character without having to get into the head in the way that Ian Fleming had kind of done quite self-indulgently in other books.
I totally agree. Now, gentlemen, we've got to hearken to a really interesting area that I like in particular, and in order to do that, I want to actually go over something, and that is Bond goes for native seafood cocktail supreme, followed by disjointed home farm chicken sauté au croissant, while Felix has a Baltic herring and sour cream and chopped tenderloin of beef, French fry onion rings. And sitting on the balcony, they have another double dry martini, badly cooked rubbish, as they call it. This is hamburger and bad hamburger, Felix tells Bond. The French onion rings were never in France, and they're not even rings, they're oval. I guess what I'm talking about is, to me, if you love the James Bond lifestyle, if you've ever straightened out your bow tie at prom when you were wearing a tux, this is the book for you. I swear, every 6 pages, they're doing another drink. They're talking about another Bond lifestyle moment. This thing was so filled. It's literally page 200 where Bond comes back, and before he reports to the police commissioner all this big news, what does he do? He orders a club sandwich and a double bourbon. The guy is my hero because he's got his priorities straight.
Yeah.
100% agree.
What did you think of the lifestyle moments in this book?
I kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, how I kind of felt that there were moments where we were just moving straight through without corners. And that was probably one of those moments, exactly what you're talking about. All of a sudden, it was like the heat of something or other. And then all of a sudden, he was ordering a sandwich. I'm like, did I miss something? Wait, hang on a second. Like, how did we get there? So, yeah, there was certainly a lot of that. And honestly, like I said, I loved that Leiter tirade. At one point, he says something like, he was going on about the industry, the restaurant industry, and waiters and bartenders. And he said, anybody wearing a tux before 7 p.m. is probably I forget if he said a snake or an alligator or something or other trying to get your money from you at one of these hotels. I mean, I thought that stuff was really good. And again, I loved, there was a lot of good sit down talking about cocktails and food moments here. So, and it sort of goes to what I said earlier about how I almost feel in a lot of ways, again, I'm missing some of the more introspective parts of the character in this one, but in other ways, Fleming is really kind of, honing his craft here, where we are kind of doing this superhero story, but we're still doing it with this James Bond character who likes to eat and drink and he likes his women, etc. So the stew is working. It's balanced.
But I agree with you that well, I mean, think about it. We start the book with him with a hangover. He's had 12 whiskeys. He's had 60 cigarettes. I mean, he is hurting hard. But I think
hashtag Bond Fitness Challenge.
Well, damn it. It was too late for him at that point. But Alan Hilburn's got a really good point, is that Fleming is so good at describing food and cocktails that you want to eat. Like it's almost like commercial in a sense of like, it drives you to, I hate to say it, drink or eat like Bond himself or like Felix Leiter. And I think it kind of wraps all of that around. So when he gets to Shrublands and he comes out of there and he's on a health kick for 2 weeks, you don't even know who he is.
I think it's interesting. This book, to me, it strikes me as like one of the only books where there's criticism of food, which is interesting. That whole tirade about that. Most of the books, I remember Goldfinger, there was that beautiful mouth-watering description of the meal, whereas this, there's food that wasn't good. Which is,
by the way, I love the fact. Speaking of food that's not good, Roland, everybody there was a gentleman that said, "What's a club sandwich?" Which, by the way, it's a cultural thing. Joe and I and Roland, who lives in New Jersey, could easily find them in any New Jersey diner, and they're delicious. But Michael Poplawski, who also lives in New Jersey, what's going on with New Jersey and Bond fans? A double-decker sandwich with turkey, ham, etc. It's a real mouthful. Yeah, it usually comes with French fries, and they're delicious. Now, if you put a double bourbon with that, yeah, you could die right after that, and you'd be okay.
It's kind of a Dagwood sandwich. It's a monster.
It is. Poor Eddie Cedric says, if I ate and drank like Bond, I'd be in the emergency room having my stomach pumped, which, by the way, goes back to what I've always said about Bond and what I'm hoping Bond never changes. Bond is not a Boy Scout. Bond is not Superman. Bond is an anti-hero. He's fallible. We love him because he's probably a version of a person we could never be, nor would we want to be. And that's fine. We're not going to emulate those aspects of him. But he can drink and eat like that, and he could smoke cigarettes. It doesn't mean I'm going to pick up a cigarette. It just means that he's got vices and bad habits because he knows he could and probably will die tomorrow. So there it is. My little tirade.
Well said.
Right? I mean, now, gentlemen, ladies, everybody out there, there's something that happened in this book I want to get your reaction on, and it felt like a movie. And that is, more than most books, I felt like there was a focus on gadgets and vehicles. There was a lot of discussion of cars, the boats, even where the boat was made, all those details, what it could do. I mean, extreme Ian Fleming type detail on the vehicles, but also gadgets. There was a page and a half about how the Geiger counter and how the watch works and everything like that. I loved it because it feels like the Bond that I grew up with, but it was kind of a little weird for me to see it in a novel. How did you react to that?
Because they hadn't really had gadgets to that degree before. And the description of the Disco Volante is almost like, if I read that and I was a millionaire shopping for a yacht, I'd be like, oh yeah, definitely want that.
Yes.
I noticed that as well. I probably wasn't really like jumping out of my skin for all that stuff, but I did kind of find that there was a lot of gadgety stuff, and probably even more. Where I really started to pick it up was when they seemed to talk a lot about the submarine before they actually got there, and it was almost like a lot of build up for this big submarine scene. So there was a lot of talk about that. I thought that was kind of interesting.
I almost felt like, so Joe, you hit on something really interesting. I thought that was the underwater scene, which I know we need to talk about the environments too. But the underwater scene, to me, I enjoyed because it wasn't the bombastic thing that we wound up with in the movie. It was a little bit more intimate. It was a little quicker, obviously. But it was kind of interesting that you have this big submarine. You even have the captain saying, yeah, they never let me open this thing up. They never let me do what I need to do. And I'm thinking like, oh, geez, he's going to blow the living shit out of the Disco Volante. What's he going to do? Blow up the Bahamas? Like, this guy's going to go all Red October on us. And really, it just doesn't pay off.
And nuclear submarines were pretty new then as well, weren't they? So, I mean, this was a big, sexy piece of military equipment.
I'll tell you this too, and like I said, I don't want to skip ahead, but I remember even as I started to reread the book, one of the things I always remembered about the novel of Thunderball was there's a lot of time that they're on a submarine. And I remember when I picked the book back up, it's been a little while since I read it. I started to get nervous. I'm like, am I going to read this and find that Never Say Never Again is a more faithful adaptation of this book? Because I do remember Connery on a sub in that movie. Yeah. But then as I read it, I was like, oh, no. I mean, I felt like the original Thunderball is far closer to this novel. But I like I said, that part kind of stuck with me. That Bond was on. It was interesting that you didn't see that in the film because, like Roland was sort of saying, this was kind of a new big deal, you know. So you'd think maybe they would have taken advantage of that for a film, but they didn't. So, but all the better, because I don't really think it elevates Never Say Never Again, and you know, it's just there.
Could anything elevate that? But keep moving along. Keep moving along. Well, I do want to talk about, I mean, it really does need to be addressed before we get into the movie, is a lot of controversy around this novel. And I fully, as I'm sure you did, fully enjoyed consuming this novel. I'll tell you, I actually read it in 3 different phases. I really wanted to take my time with it, and I think it rolled out extremely well, very satisfactory. Even, you know, Bond winds up in the hospital, and, you know, there's a little bit of kind of like relaxing with Domino in there. But I honestly felt like in the interpretation of this novel, coming over to how did I feel after it was done? Because we're about to get into kind of like, and we need to get into the controversy of this novel, and we need to get into the movie novel, because this is the one, before we get into On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is almost blow by blow novel to movie. We got to talk about that. But I felt so satisfied at the end. There have been a couple novels where I was like, oh, wow, he just ended that novel. Like, it's done. Yeah. And I don't need the quip. I don't need, you know, I didn't think Christmas only came once a year or whatever. I don't need that finality, but I felt like this was very satisfactory. And a couple people have said this almost read like a good Mickey Spillane detective novel, where it's like you're putting all the pieces together. The audience is with the hero, as lost as the hero or as found as the hero. And in the end, there's this wonderful resolution with the hero. And I think that's a really good observation by a lot of people in the chat room of that. But Roland, as a writer who's got to think about these things and organize, I mean, what was your takeaway?
No, you used the word satisfaction. That's exactly what I felt. And there have been, like Goldfinger, I remember I loved certain aspects of it, but the plot kind of fell apart, whereas this was tight. And I think it is Lee Child who said, you know, the ending of a book should be surprising, but it should also make perfect sense and like piece everything together and give you that sense of satisfaction. And I think this book does it perhaps more effectively than any other James Bond book. And maybe, again, that's because of the other people's influences, the screenplay and the structure and stuff. But yeah, satisfying is how I'd agree that it should be described. Yeah.
Joe, what about you? How did you feel when you closed the book?
Pretty good. Honestly, I think I did sort of get that same sense where I feel like they're writing for a movie. You know, I remember, I'm going to make another Raymond Benson reference. Whenever you read Raymond Benson books, you feel like you're reading for something that he's basically pitching and saying, wouldn't this make a great movie, guys? I was starting to get a little of that here, where we're literally kind of writing for the screen a little bit. Like we like it's like Fleming just has that sixth sense. Like this could end up this is probably going to be a movie, so I got to make it cinematic. So yeah, I mean everything does sort of tie up in a way that a kind of, you know, succinct story might. And so yeah, and again, I'm kind of mixed on whether I like that. I don't mind it when I kind of like word salad. You know, just give me a lot of words and let me kind of just go off on a. Doesn't have to be punctuated exactly the way you feel it needs to be.
Not Sturt has a good point. They say it ends so fast, and I think Joe, what you're describing, a couple of people have said in the chat room. It's not their favorite book because when Fleming gives you a lot of words to decipher on your own, it's like art. You can make of it what you want. You can put it through your own filter and interpretation. When it's a screenplay, like Thunderball, there's really not a lot of room for interpretation. It is what it is. It's a screenplay. Oh.
Sorry, that was my... What? That
was the most awesome thing that ever happened. There's a fox. There's a fox there.
My little guy up here, Mycroft, is a fox. And so he has a fox. And I think it was just being shown off. So there we go.
It was the perfect cameo, and it was so needed. But one of the things that is there's not a lot of interpretation here, and I think people like Fleming's book to be like art, where it's like, you know what, I'm gonna take away what I want to out of that scene, and I think that's what Joe's talking about. But Roland, what were you going to say?
Oh, it just occurred to me. I struggled when I was starting out writing because I was struggling to find my voice, and in the end, I got into what does Fox say? It says for Fox's sake. When I started writing romance books, I knew what was going to happen in my story, but romance is a really, really structured formula where, you have one chapter from the male point of view, one chapter from the female point of view. They have to meet in the first chapter. And it reminded me of Mr. Ogilvy, and I'm sure you'll be familiar with this, who said, "Give me the freedom of a tightly defined brief." And I think when you have a really tight structure, it often brings out the best in a writer. So my thought about this is, did the tight, defined structure of a screenplay bring out the best in Ian Fleming in terms of wrapping up his story in a satisfying way? Or was this the outside influence molding his talent into something that was a little more structured?
Well, let's talk about that. Nice segue. So let me read everybody some interesting information. And some of you probably know this, some of you don't. So basically what happened was, I told you they were going through the different titles. Fleming decided to write this into a novelization. In 1961, McClory read an advanced copy of the book, and he and Whittingham, who were the two primaries that worked on the screenplay, immediately petitioned the High Court in London for an injunction to stop the publication. Both McClory and Fleming claimed to have come up with the concept of Spectre and the ideas. The case lasted 3 weeks. Fleming became very unwell. And I bring that up as a matter of interest because most of you know that this mirrors a lot of what Cubby Broccoli was going through in his last few years with lawsuits of a similar ilk. Any of you that have been in lawsuits or high stress of any kind, it erodes you. It really does. I mean, I'm talking from a science as well as philosophical standpoint. It does destroy you. And this is exactly what it did to Fleming. A lot of people are like, well, Fleming drank himself to death. He smoked himself. He lived too much of a life. But I will tell you that stress is the killer. I mean, stress is worse than any killer out there. So what happened? Well, he had a heart attack shortly during this. And his friend, Ivar Bryce, who helped him work on the screenplay, came to him and said, look, give this guy McClory a deal. This is killing you. It's killing you. And so they settled out of court. McClory gained literary and film rights for the screenplay, while Fleming was given the rights to the novel, although it had to be recognized as based on the screen treatment by Kevin McClory, Jack Whittingham, and the author. On settlement, Fleming ultimately finally did admit that the novel reproduces a substantial part of the copyright material in that there's similarity of the story of the novel and story that's said in the film scripts. So what happened? August 1964, 9 months after the conclusion of the trial, Fleming suffered another heart attack and he died at the age of 56. So there was a lot of controversy with who owned what, to the point where even when Thunderball came out, they still had to give McClory credit. Obviously, we have another film that everybody was just talking about. I think even Jocelyn was talking about Never Say Never Again. She just watched it. So we've got to start delving into some of this because not only is there controversy, but there's now connections to the movie. How much were you guys trying to equalize the movie and the novel in your mind, Joe?
Big time. And honestly, I usually when you read a book that you've already seen done as a film, my personal feeling is that most of the time you can get lost in the book, and then every so often you'll go, oh, kind of like how I saw in the movie. I was doing that frequently here, and I was honestly sort of impressed I mean, again, not only am I enjoying the novel for what it is, it made me sort of respect the film even more, because I thought the liberties that they take in the film made a lot of sense, you know. And and it was funny because, I mean, honestly, I've done, I remember courses in college. I had a course in college called Film and Literature, and it was all about film interpretations of printed work. And it could be a book, could be a short story, it could be whatever. And this is how they changed it into a movie. And it was pretty fascinating. And I was watching, it was rereading this, and I'm thinking to myself, this Thunderball is kind of a masterclass in how you make that leap from, again, the printed page to the screen. But then it was funny because then I'm saying to myself, yeah, isn't this a perfect example of how in a book it might work well this way, but on the screen it has to be this. But then I said to myself, well, maybe that's kind of not fair, because this, again, was conceived as a film. So it was conceived as a film, and then he sort of did a book version of it, and then you got the film version of it. So it's almost like I guess it kind of started from the same nucleus and kind of went in two different directions. Here's the central story. Yeah. It can work as a film and it can work as a book. And here's how I'll do it both ways. And I guess that's kind of why it is what it is. Prime example is, I mentioned earlier, the scene when Bond meets Domino. In the book, I love how it is in the book. I love how it's dialogue. It's Bond being a guy and kind of, trying to be charming and smooth or whatever. In the film, they're underwater. I mean, it's tropical fish. It's a whole different dynamic. But yet I was sort of stunned at how, when they come up out of the water, some of that little banter back and forth is very, very similar to how they bantered in the novel. So again, I sort of walked away saying, yeah, masterclass. I mean, it's pretty smart how they did it effectively in both areas.
For me, the movie took moments in the novel and made them more visual and iconic, almost poetic. So they used poetry of vision to tell the story, as opposed to in the book, it was about dialogue. I mean, can you imagine Sean Connery and Domino from the movies having the amount of dialogue and the amount of connection in scenes? I mean, it'd be an 8.5 hour film, if you put all of that in there to tell the full story. So I think they had to be a little bit more iconic with it. Roland, what about you? I mean, were you wrestling with it a little bit? I mean, you can't undo seeing the movie and then read a book like this.
No, and I think the thing that really I kept thinking about and coming back to is, like, this book has so many of the iconic aspects of Bond, specifically the movie Bond, like Spectre and the gadgets and the way the story is told and wraps up and things. And I'm like, it kind of troubled me, because I kept thinking, is the Bond that we know and love, who has had such a huge influence on our lives, was he an amalgam of these other people's influences as well as Ian Fleming's? I would like to think that James Bond is pure Ian Fleming, but there are so many aspects and iconic things about the entire franchise that started here.
No, it's a great point. By the way, this is typical of what I'm seeing in the chat room right now. Jerry Manis says, I read the book through the film's eyes. How could you help it? But it was much more than an adaptation. It almost like expanded it. It's almost like you're finding out a little bit more about these characters. There were a couple moments where I walked away. I think I even mentioned, like, Largo, for example. I think the book version of him was really interesting. I think even somebody said it would be interesting to see Charlton Heston playing Largo from the novel into the movie, just kind of this larger than life individual, which would be fascinating.
Now, I remember there were The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker, because they were so different from the books. They had Christopher Woods wrote novelizations of them that, like, expanded in certain things. So it's interesting you said that, this book kind of expands on the film.
It really does. And honestly, I remember even it sort of after I finished the book and I'm sort of like, putting my thoughts together, there was two, like, in terms of, things that they added that weren't in the books. First of all, there's a whole character in the film that I'm pretty sure I didn't see at all in the film. I mean, in the novel, rather. There's no Fiona Volpe in the novel at all. And I remember thinking, like, you would have thought that was sort of based on something that they kind of expanded on, but not even. And quite frankly, I even sort of was reflecting on the idea that they mentioned Vargas in the book, and Heather Green just talk about timing.
Yep.
they mentioned Vargas in the book almost in passing, just as the name of one of his guys who's doing something, but he kind of gets more spotlight in the film.
Yeah.
So you would think that the film version does nothing but chisel away all the excess so they can tighten it up into a 2-hour story. No, I mean, they chisel away some things, truncate some things, but they also other things kind of expand and flourish a little bit.
And Fiona Volpe is like such a Bond woman.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it is pretty amazing how the film, there's a lot of film things in the film that are purely cinematic. I mean, I think Fiona Volpe is kind of, and I sort of mentioned this before when I talked about Largo. I said Largo in the film has a little Goldfinger sort of wrapped up in there. And I think Fiona Volpe is also a little Pussy Galore. I think this is sort of like the answer to that. So again, they're while on some hands they're interpreting the novel very closely. Right. However, you can very clearly see there are things that work in the cinema that we're certainly not going to not do in this one because it's working.
Well, look at the length of time in the movie they spend on killing Domino's brother. Giuseppe Patacci in the novel. Mm-hmm. Here, he's just a playboy who's, wanting extra money and a new car, and he's gone in kind of the next chapter. So it's really quick. By the way, this is great. So I think Alan Hilburn has left his senses, but we're still going to love him. In my humble opinion, the best Blofeld you see is Max von Sydow in Never Say Never Again. Them's fighting words. Any reactions to that?
I'll back out a little bit, and I think that in terms of just in the same way that a lot of people will argue that Daniel Craig is probably the best actor who played James Bond because he's kind of more of an actor's actor. Max von Sydow is a you're talking about a classic actor.
Right.
I don't think he gets very much to do, and one of the ironies of Never Say Never Again to me is always that whole movie exists because of Blofeld, because of the invention of Spectre and Blofeld, and they frankly don't do much with that character in that film. So yeah, I think if they gave him more to do, you might have had a really good Blofeld with Max von Sydow, but I don't think it really happens.
Telly Savalas or death.
There you go, Roland.
All right,
we're
gonna do something really challenging, and I know it's tough on a Friday. Some of us have been even drinking. I'm going to try something challenging, but I need everybody in the chat room to play along, but mostly Joe and Roland. I need your help with this. So we're going to take each one of the characters from the novel, and we're going to recast them as if a Thunderball movie never happened. Okay? So you do not, and now I'm going to make this easy, you do not have to use an actor of the time. In other words, you don't have to use a 1950s, 1960s actor. It could be any actor, but try to match them to the Bond that you read in the novel. Don't try to do a Sean Connery replacement. Try to do the novel James Bond. Who would you choose? And I'm going to keep an eye on the chat room while you two think.
Are we starting with just James Bond or all the characters?
We're just trying Bond first.
Ooh, that's I think, because Sean Connery did such a good job with the movie, but I think he didn't have quite the.
Yep. And let me buy some time too for you as you think of this, because it's really about taking the information of those characters from the novel and trying to bake them around who you would kind of vote, if you will, into that role.
Everyone's going to hate me. I could see Henry Cavill doing it.
I get it.
Yeah, I could totally see that. I think that would work.
Because of the novel version, he's got the sex, the drink, the cigarettes, the humor. He could pull that off. Is that it?
Yeah. Because I mean, Domino is clearly like a very attractive woman who is the mistress of a very powerful, wealthy man, and yet James Bond goes in there and they're getting intimate together before you'd know it. And who else in the entire world could do that except Henry Cavill?
James Mason. John Lennon says Daniel Day-Lewis. We've got Michael Poplasek saying Patrick McGoohan. Isn't he dead? McGoohan.
Good choice, that.
Timothy Dalton. George Lazenby. All right.
I can see that.
Jeremy Brett. Sam Neill. We're getting into Largo state. What do you think,
Charles
Joe?
Dance.
I like that Charles Dance is Largo.
That is good.
One. I always people always stump me when they say who should be the next Bond or who should play Bond, because I feel like my knowledge of current actors aren't that good. Henry Cavill, frankly, I even, this is gonna sound totally left field, but I was thinking to myself, but all right, well, who younger, and he's not so young right now, but I probably shouldn't even say this, but I started thinking,
you're amongst friends.
Well, what if Jason Bourne was Bond in this? Because I could kind of see him.
Matt Damon?
I don't know. Yeah, like
that's
all of a sudden,
choice.
it is. I mean,
bold
it's
choice.
like I said, this is a left field one, but we're getting kind of crazy, and we're talking craziness. All of a sudden, I said to myself, I could kind of see him just strolling down the street, talking to her, talking about cigarettes, getting a drink, and like I could kind of see that all of a sudden. I don't know. I just kind of
the only thing I can't see Matt Damon doing is the womanizing aspect, because he's just so clean cut, and the whole cruel looks thing that Fleming writes. I want someone that's like not ugly, but almost like a little roughed up.
Like I said, I'm not committing to this. I mean, this is, like I said, this is kind of out of left field, but Damon's to me, I mean, he's got this angular face. I can sort of see him being like, not he's a little, when he's chiseled enough that it's almost, I could see him being kind of direct and to the point, the way kind of like novel Bond is. And again, when you're trying to be charming, when it comes to talking to women, you're trying to look like you're not trying to be charming. I mean, you're trying to make it look like you're not trying at all.
That's what I've been doing.
Right. Look like you're trying, and like you're done. So it's like you know what I mean.
I look too desperate. By the way, to start off the next character, we're going to play this little wonderful drinking game with. It's so much better if you drink with this game. Gethin Jenkins Jones is going to kick this off, and it is casting the novel version. Listen to me. The novel version of Largo, and his choice is Daniel Craig. I don't know if that'll go over, but that is his choice.
I could see that. I don't think he's big enough. My thought is going to sound ridiculous. You're going to laugh at me, but do you remember you remember the old the animated DC things, and you had Superman and Batman and stuff, and they would had these titanic triangular like bodies, and they had Lex Luthor there was like physically huge and had that deep voice and almost those huge hands. So you'd want somebody with those kind of proportions. I think
I like that. And I would choose also. I agree with you, Roland, an imposing actor, size-wise, especially dimensional to Bond. The other thing is I would choose a really good actor. Like, because, you could say, oh, Dave Bautista or something like that. But and it's not to knock him or anything like that, but you need someone that's going to command the room. Because even in the novel, they say, this is a guy with a personality. Same with Blofeld. He walks into a room, people can feel it. He doesn't even have to say anything. People just know this is a big dude. So I don't know if Mark Hamill really fits that bill.
I don't know about that.
I don't know.
Brad
Pitt?
I kind of like that one. That's
not a bad one.
I can see that.
I can see that.
I've always pitched the argument, when I remember like my first reviews of Spectre, the film, talking about, I just didn't like what's his face as Blofeld at all. But I said, but if you actually took Dave Bautista and made him Blofeld, I think Dave Bautista would knock it out of the park as Blofeld, frankly.
Wow.
So I'm kind of almost like, as we're talking about Largo, I can almost sort of see him as Largo as well.
I think Dave Bautista is quite an accomplished actor, but maybe the thing is that most of us know him from, he doesn't get to explore that range. So I can totally see where you're coming from.
We have 2 mic drops. I love this, and I want to give credit to 2 people. Shashikavi, I apologize if I'm butchering your name, and Josh Ferguson both said Brando.
I could see that. Brilliant. Yeah.
Sure.
I think he would be brilliant because he would bring that level of charm and swarminess and crazy to it and physicality.
Yeah.
And he was like, even in the 70s, he was like a big but sleek man.
Oh, Poplawski, Clancy Brown. That's a good one, too. There can be only one. I like that.
I don't know who that is.
Oh, yes, you do. From Highlander, the guy, the Kurgan. He's a character actor that's been in everything.
Okay.
Oh, Mike's got a good choice there. Yeah, I like that.
I like Ray Liotta.
Michael J. White. That's interesting. I like that. I like that. Tim Hands. Don't worry, we're not going to cast any Americans as Bond. Don't worry. Joe.
He's casting Matt Damon.
Well,
I had nothing to do with that.
I trust me. I would never cast an American as Bond. I don't even like the American Bond women.
George Clooney. I don't know. Might be. Is he intimidating enough?
That's it. You know what? I tell you what. If he was a little more of an unknown, I could almost see that.
All right. I'm going to give Mark Smith that. All right. Fun one. Let's have a palate cleanser. Domino. Ooh. The novel Domino.
That's
a lot of different opportunities here.
I'll tell you, my brain went to, I kind of hinted at this earlier. Monica Bellucci was one, and Maria, whose name I always forget, but the cigar girl from The World Isn't Enough.
But
that's kind of where I go.
I'm getting youth when I read the novel Domino. I'm getting, I don't know why. I'm just getting almost like, oh gosh, who was the woman from Cowboys and Aliens? Very, very pretty, but I forget.
Yes, I remember Olivia Wilde.
Yeah, I'm getting like that. I'm getting like almost like hippie.
Okay.
Throw off my sandals, very tan. 30 to 35 years old or younger. I don't know why. I'm getting that.
I'm going to go completely out of left field. So, and I know she is persona non grata in the world of movies and stuff, but Gina Carrero or whoever was in the Mandalorian, because I imagine Domino as being athletic to the point where like she has musculature and she's physically very capable. And I was like, the darkness and the kind of strength and presence that she has might work.
I got one for you, Megan Fox. And I kind of feel like there's not a lot of things I would cast her in, but now that we're talking about this character, I can see that.
Megan Fox, that's a name I've not heard in a long, long time.
Yeah.
If you saw her, you'd be like, oh, that one. She's Transformers.
Yeah. Margot Robbie, not bad. Penelope Cruz.
I feel they're not big enough. They're not like strong enough physically. Because I mean, Domino spends her entire time swimming, being athletic. So I imagine she's got like the slightly ripped arms and the tight waist. And Olivia Wilde is beautiful and stunning, but she's not like a physically athletic person.
Who is Claudia Cardinal?
I don't know, but I love that name. I might have to Google her.
Emily Blunt.
Oh, I could see that.
Yes,
Mike's very good at this.
I saw Sophia Loren go by. I like that one.
Please don't give Mike too much credit. It'll go right to his head, and there's no living with him. Hudson Kane, another mic drop. Betty Boop. Good call. Nice legs.
I like the Gal Gadot by Ladies Who Blonde. That's a good one.
Ooh. She's definitely got the physicality.
Actually,
I can see that.
Jocelyn, that's perfect because, again, I don't know why I'm seeing this carefree whimsy that I think she could pull off. Like, no makeup, just sunshine and air. Joe, are you being attacked by a fox as well? I saw you like glancing over your left-hand shoulder.
No, I just kind of noticed it was just raining out as well.
Oh, it's like a hurricane here too. Yeah, but we're cozy and we're warm. All right, now this one's going to be pure fun. pure fun because we could go as goofy as we want, especially with the novel version. Felix Leiter.
Oh, somebody had a brilliant
Larry David, anyone? No.
Somebody had a brilliant idea of Steve McQueen, which I could actually see. I know Steve McQueen
That's
is the
Felix
leading man.
Leiter. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think that would work.
That would be like cool with cool.
Yeah.
Right. I go back to Jack Lord every time I read the novels. Frankly, I feel like he kind of nails it. In fact, when I was listening to the audio version, and I forget who was the guy who narrates this version I had, but there was somebody he kept reminding me of it. I couldn't put my finger on it.
I love Gene Hackman. Look at that.
I saw Sinatra.
So I interrupt you, Sinatra, but
no, go ahead.
Jeffrey Wright as Felix Leiter. I've heard that works. Jack Lord, yes, of course. Spencer Tracy, not bad.
James Garner is an interesting one.
Spencer Tracy could almost have been Largo, actually, because he was quite a big chap.
Cary Grant. I could see that. Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah, I could see that, actually.
Not bad.
He's got the Texan thing.
All right. We're going to do something a little bit different now that we're going to take off our casting agent hats. Everybody relax for a little bit because, we've been talking about this book in conjunction with the movie, in conjunction with some of the controversy, but let's bring it around full circle. I'd like everybody, and I'm going to start with Joe and Roland, of course, first. Out of the books that we've read, because we've been going in consecutive order here, and this is kind of our 8th or 9th novel. Where does Thunderball stack up with you? Is it amongst the top? Is it the very top, your favorite? You could just pick it up. Does it fall towards the bottom, middle? Which ones beat it out? But I'd love a little color around it, and whoever wants to jump in here first.
I was going to say, I have to admit that I've almost always put the novel of it aside and focused on Ian Fleming's other novels because I almost feel like it's kind of not purely him. And so, I mean, maybe that's irrational. I think it is, a very good novel. But to me, it's like I prefer the pure Fleming, even though this has so many iconic elements from the Bond franchise.
Yeah, and we haven't even gotten through them all, so it's probably an unfair question. I was just curious because I'm thinking about my thoughts when I close the book and I go, that was good. It was almost as good as blank, or it wasn't quite as good as this, or it missed the mark of this one. I mean, that's kind of like the comparison that I start to create. But Joe, does that ever go through your mind? Is this kind of a new exercise?
No, I mean, I do the same mental exercise with the books as I do with the movies and kind of stacking them and ranking them a little bit. I think this one for me is probably squarely in the middle. I like it every bit as much as the other ones. There's some of his that I think are just spectacular and are just awesome. Like I said earlier, I sort of feel like I'm missing a lot of that Bond inner dialogue that I'm so used to. So it's hard. I mean, I like kind of being in Bond's brain, for these books. That to me is like the whole point of the books, frankly, is like to really get into the mind of James Bond. So yeah, but again, the elements are there. We said the lifestyle elements are there. I feel like you get a lot of good Bond and Domino back and forth. So I can soak it up, with the best of them. So, but I mean, there's definitely a few that I think are just tippy top. But so this one right in the middle.
And David, this is one of your favorite, isn't it?
It's up there. I would say probably in my top 5. But I got to tell you what's really interesting, and this is why I find these conversations fascinating, is most of the chat room so far. Hudson Kane, the book should be put in the bin. I don't think that's in his top 5. Joe Hahn, bottom half. Eddie, I don't like any of the books I've read. All right. Daniel House.
You're in the right place.
3 out of 5 stars. That's not too fantastic. And then we've got, where was the other one that I saw that was really interesting. It basically said that it was too much like the movie. I was bored with the movie too. I guess I'm a little wonderfully taken back. And what I mean by that is I love to hear other people's opinions. And I think, Joe, you're like, it's probably like halfway. This clearly, people did not have the same reaction I had, where I just had like so much fun with this. Like Dr. No, to me, is pure fantasy. I mean, there's there's nearly monsters in it. And he's going through like, obstacle courses, for goodness sakes. And it's got Jamaica. So to me, it's amongst the top. And I felt like this was, dare I say, almost like the movie Tomorrow Never Dies, where I like Tomorrow Never Dies because it's like I can just take out my brain, which I use way too much at work, and I can go like this on a plate and put it into the microwave while I read this book and then take it out again when it's warm. But it's disgusting. But I just feel like some people don't like that. And Joe, to your point, it hit midway. So there's other ones that obviously stacked up higher.
But it's right. Tomorrow Never Dies has all of the iconic elements of Bond as well. But it's almost like, it's been assembled by numbers. And in some ways, this book feels the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Tim and I, we can have a pity party because he put in the top 5, which is good. Roland, what about you? Where does it fall kind of in the hierarchy for you?
I would say in the middle, but I have a special place in my heart for Thunderball the book and Thunderball the movie because I was married in the Bahamas. I went there. It's a play. I went swimming with the tiger sharks in the same place they filmed certain scenes. So
you swam with tiger sharks?
I don't know if they were tiger sharks, but I do remember we were swimming with the sharks and they said, don't splash in the water. Don't do anything dangerous. And my brother-in-law jumped off the boat because he hadn't heard this. We all had to get out. But to me, the Bahamas is part of my heart. So I've always got this attachment to it. So even though I think it fits in the middle of the books, I have more affection for it because of the reasons it impacts me personally.
By the way, Joe Darlington swam with the golden grotto shark, the most dangerous shark of all.
I would expect nothing less.
We have video of this, by the way.
Exactly.
Check this out. Talk about poetic. We have copywriters in the room here. Jerry Mata says this was like a nice Merlot, while Dr. No was a claret.
That's brilliant. That's beautiful. Jerry, you're a genius.
I'd say that was pretty accurate.
That's pretty good. It's almost the first James Bond continuity novel. It's on the page, not in your imagination.
Ooh,
these are very heady.
Yeah.
I am so impressed with our audience.
There's a term I use almost too much when I'm talking about films, and sometimes there are films that feel like they're just a little too removed from the real thing. Like when I'm talking about sequels, and I kind of fall back on the term fan fiction. It feels like fan fiction, like someone else is writing about this topic as opposed to the people who started it. I would almost say that Thunderball starts to touch on that a tiny bit, where it feels a little bit removed. It's not Fleming just doing authentic Fleming, James Bond, etc. Yeah. You feel the other influences, and you feel even his attempts to do something that is more cinematic. So it does start to break away a little bit. I'm not saying it's bad, but it breaks away and does it differently.
And you mentioned it. Oh no, go right ahead.
Just real quick. I was going to say that a lot of people feel like Thunderball, like some of the other films where Alex Lamas has a perfect point here. One of my favorite films and books, both were tons of fun. Thunderball loses some of its gravitas, its heaviness, as opposed to some of the other books that may have a little bit more kind of weight to them, so to speak.
I think Joe nailed it when he said authenticity, because it's like I'm the same page as you. When I want to read a James Bond book, it would not be the one I'd go to because it doesn't feel. It's not like taking a stroll through Ian Fleming's brain, which a lot of the other ones are.
Yep.
Yes, and we know factually it wasn't just his brain. Yeah. There was 4 or 5 other brains. Yeah. Mark Smith brings up a really interesting point, and I touched upon it earlier. The whole idea of when I read about this, the whole thing of there are points when I'm reading this book where, and I don't get like this with books, where I'm like oh God, like what's going to happen? Like what's going to happen to the Spectre guys? What's going to happen to Bond? The whole Barracuda following him. I have swam with Barracudas off of Key West, and they are the most scary looking thing. They almost like breathe in like big gulps, and they are huge. They are 4 to 5 feet. They're silver, and you're not supposed to wear watches or anything reflective. It's very scary to hear the recounting of this, the shoulders, the ripping of the part. That was very nerve-wracking. I don't know. I thought I was pulled into the book there.
I love, actually, as a kid, I used to love these books about like underwater adventures and submarining and stuff. So that was one of the things I really enjoyed about it. And I really enjoyed about Live and Let Die and other books where they had the underwater sections, because Ian Fleming's really good at that.
Totally.
I will totally agree with that. And frankly, it's one of the reasons why, one of the big criticisms that Thunderball gets the film is that there's a lot of underwater stuff and it gets too slow. I love the underwater stuff. I so disagree with people who say it gets slow and I for some reason, I mean, when I was a kid, I was like a fish. Like I loved being in the water. I just being underwater was so much fun. So when I would read them in the books, I'm like, I loved it. So I loved all that stuff in the book and I love it in the film.
Calvin Dyson did this amazing video about, I think it was Never Say Never Again, and he used these sock puppets saying the McClory was like, oh, have some another underwater section. I was laughing like a drain.
It was great, yeah. Totally.
Oh my gosh. Well, and it is, I mean, it's not a controversy that we're going to lose, because McClory, for example, really delayed so many of the films, sparked so many of the controversies, the angst, the heart attacks, the deaths. I mean, it really did start a steamroll. It's interesting now because, not to totally dovetail into a different arena, but, obviously we received a lot of big news this week. It wasn't just Horowitz's new novel in 2022 or Ian Fleming's birthday, but Amazon is buying MGM. And, I heard everything from that's it. That's the death knell of Bond. Goodbye, franchise. All the way through to, yay, now I'm going to have all my Bond films in one spot. I mean, there really were the extremes. But there's always going to be this barracuda shark swimming of controversy and an assumption around everything around Bond. Gentlemen, to kind of cap this off, because we do want to talk about the news a little bit, because it's going to affect everything. I'd love a quick little snapshot. Maybe, Joe, you start with you, of what did you think of the news with Amazon and MGM?
You know what? I don't know what to make of it just yet. And I've been saying it's funny. This is not an exaggeration when I say that I've been saying for years now. The conversation has been ongoing about, what do you think is going to happen to Bond after Bond 25? And my take has always been, well, the road splits one of two ways. If the existing team stays with it, then I guess we're not going to get another film for many years. Just get used to that idea now, because no one is there's not a lot of energy left in the existing team, as much as we love their legacy, etc. And they've been good stewards of this product so far. They're running out of steam. So if they keep it, just get ready for your next 4 or 5 years till we get another one. If they sell it, whoever buys it is probably going to, because we're living in the world where people are just spitting out content, streaming services are tripping over themselves to get content on their site. Yeah. You get a product like James Bond, you're not going to let it just sit there. So somebody's going to be anxious to do something. So I think the plus side of this is that we're going to get something sooner rather than later. Somebody's going to be anxious to get moving and start this new venture. But as Disney has proven, kind of depends on who gets it. At one point we thought Disney was going to be the product to buy James Bond. We thought Disney was going to, they were buying everything. It was like Disney was looking at everything like it was Boardwalk and Park Place. I got to have that, got to have that, got to have that. And frankly, if you asked me when Marvel was becoming the big thing, I was like, let them have James Bond tomorrow. A couple of years later, I see what they do with Star Wars, and I'm like, don't let them anywhere near James Bond.
Really? That's interesting because I love The Mandalorian, and I'm like, they've managed to find...
I love the Mandalorian has been the first.
That's a cracker in the desert.
Yeah, yeah. It's when I saw the three sequel trilogy movies, the Rey story. Oh, good Lord, it's terrible.
Yeah,
I just saw an article just today or yesterday about how J.J. Abrams finally admitted, I wish we came up with a plan before we started those. So yeah, so that's it. So Amazon has them, but I still have no clue what it means. I think if I have to sort of say, is it a plus or a negative? It's a plus because it means somebody's going to be a little more anxious to do something with it. Yeah. But who they put in charge of that at this point, that's going to be the takeaway.
Yeah, I agree. Roland, what do you think?
I'm really interested I'm a huge fan of Amazon because I wouldn't be able to do what I do if it wasn't for Amazon, because I'm able to write the books I want to give back and people buy them. And Amazon has done, amazing shows like The Boys, and they've a ton of other shows that I can't think of. The Tom Clancy ones, brilliant. Yeah. Jack Ryan, brilliant. And so, they obviously have the money and they obviously have the talent to do stuff. Are the broccoli's going to cling to it and we're going to have one movie every so often? Are they going to open up the idea to... We've always been talking about like, oh, wouldn't it be great to have a 1960s set TV show? And, they could do that now. Would that be something that would happen? That might be something that's amazing. If we had anything like the quality of what Disney's put out with the franchise, it might be amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Hjort, just, from the Netherlands said a really good point. What I think people have to realize from a factual standpoint, Eon is still in charge from a creative standpoint. Bond, from a creative standpoint, what Bond will be, what Bond will talk about, what the movies will be, is in Eon's hub. The distribution, what they do with the IP and how to get it out there, the different channels, is a little bit more complicated than that. So I don't think Amazon is going... this is, again, speculation. I have no insider knowledge. I don't think speculation is going to be... I don't think Amazon is going to be this individual group that calls up Eon and goes, hey, listen, we got a great idea. Henry Cavill. And hear me out, because he's commercial, and I think you should go with him. I don't think that's going to happen. I also don't think what's going to happen is they're going to call up and go, hey, hear me out. I think you should have a Moneypenny series. I also think you should have a Q series. And you know what? Felix Leiter with a hook. Make him Aquaman. Make him the Aquaman of James Bond. I don't think any of that's going to happen. What I think is going to happen is Amazon is probably going to handle a lot of the back end, a lot of the library, the research, merchandising. Amazon is the king, not the queen, and not the crown prince, the king of merchandising. And I think that they're going to be focusing on how do we take this IP and blow it out. The other thing is we've got to realize Amazon didn't buy this to get James Bond. As much as people are like, oh, they did to get James Bond. That's what our brains, because we're fans, think. They did it because they're trying to sell more Amazon products. They want 4,000 movies and 1,700 TV programs. And if you go there and watch these things, ads are served up to you and you buy more Amazon products. So they need these things because they're losing all their licenses across Disney, Lucasfilm. It goes on and on and on. So if they didn't do this, they would literally have their own movies, the Tom Clancy ones, The Boys, and things like that left. So this is, I think, a protective business move, as opposed to Amazon saying Jeff Bezos wants to control the Bond creative entity. I think it's very squarely in the franchise's hands until they say otherwise, like, we're done. And that could happen at any moment. Who knows?
I tell you what, I want to give you the counter argument to that, because everything you said makes perfect sense, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Here's the other side of that, though. Amazon just spent how much for MGM? I'm pretty sure they spent more on MGM than Disney spent on Lucasfilm.
Correct.
Which is pretty. That's saying a lot.
Yeah.
So even though Eon on paper still has control over what they do, Amazon is not going to sit there and be like, I just spent how many billions on James Bond, and you guys want to chill out for 4 or 5 years and not make a movie? I don't think so. Somebody's going to start pushing and say, look, we need some product. And you're right in what you said about they're really buying that back catalog. And quite frankly, I think they're buying a lot of prestige as well. I sort of feel like if they want to get into the film industry, hey, let's buy. I mean, MGM is kind of like buying like if I want to get into the movie business, I'm buying the big giant theater, the classic theater that's been around for forever and it's been neglected, and I'm going to put some polish on it and bring it back. That's how they're looking at MGM, I think. And they're also saying, look, the back catalog is great, but what do you got that's active? And quite frankly, Bond is sort of the one in just in terms of what's active and they're still making movies. Mm-hmm. I think Bond has got to be at the top of that list. So
totally. No doubt. No. And by the way, no argument that when you look at the treasure trove, if you were to open up the treasure chest of MGM, Bond would be the crown at the top that you would hold it up and go, I just need to walk away with this. So no argument there. My whole point is I think a lot of people are concluding, and I've seen it in my own posts and comments, that suddenly this discussion with Amazon means literally the end of Bond, the conclusion of the franchise. And I think that's just a bit dire.
Sure. No, listen, like I said, I think interestingly, I agree with both sides on this. In some people who are saying this is the end of an era, kinda. It's also the beginning of an era. It's going to be the beginning of more energy of people saying, "Hey," I mean, again, we've been saying this for pretty much since Marvel got its sea legs. People have been saying we need our Kevin Feige. Yeah. If we get it, if Amazon is smart and they find the right Kevin Feige who understands James Bond and knows what they can do with us. And keep it true to the essence of its origins, then we're in good hands. That's the big if. The big if is who they put in charge of this project.
And from a creative point of view, I was thinking, Joe, I think I agree with so much of what you said, because you've got this that people are into James Bond right now. We're so excited about No Time to Die, and you're right. When I write books, you can, spend a year writing a book and hope that it is really successful when you publish it. Or you can write a book every 3 months, 2 months, 1 month, and all of them are going to make money. And maybe one of them is going to be a huge hit. But it's, at the moment, we wait so long for each Bond film. And sometimes they are amazing. And sometimes they are Die Another Day. And even though I love that one. But I think if we can get them making more stuff, then hopefully there are going to be some really good, exciting things, as long as they stay true to what we love.
Well, the reality is that we'll be here for it because we're Bond fans, and we're going to show up for the opening of an envelope. I mean, we will, so, look at this. I mean, there was like a hint of news about a week ago, and we were all just like, just went on it like, cicadas. So first of all, I want to take a moment because we're at the top of the hour. It is Friday. It is most of us are on a holiday weekend, but 2 individuals were good enough to take time out of their family time, out of their loved ones' time, and out of their own time to be my co-hosts, to which I call them friends and cohorts, and I wouldn't have done it without them. Roland and Joe, thank you so much for being a part of this today.
Thank you for letting me be a part of it, guys.
Same here. It's always fun. I can never say no to these because they're just too much fun. So thank you. So thank you for having us.
And they go quick. Where did 2 hours go?
It It was
I mean,
like
it seemed like just a moment ago a fox was attacking Roland. I didn't know what was going on. The other people I'd like to thank is everybody within the chat room. I told Joe, and I'm going to be very transparent with you. I told Joe minutes before we went on, I said, I think there's going to be a very small and intimate group because it's a holiday weekend. It's a Friday. People are tired. And it's just great. We had hundreds of people on, which is fantastic, which means we still all have a passion to discuss this, no matter who co-owns Bond, lo and behold. But we will, everyone, return with The Spy Who Loved Me. And so we will see you then. Until then, be very safe. Everybody be well. Take care.